Bessie Coleman and the Women Pilots History Shouldn't Forget by Carla Pacanino, CNN. Bessie Coleman broke multiple barriers when she took flight in 1921 and became the first African American woman to earn a pilot's license. Bessie Coleman was a female aviator in the early 20th century. She flew around the detours of racism and sexism to become queens in the air, and she was not the only one. Around the world, only 3% of pilots are women. Recently, there's a push to change that. One way to change that is by highlighting the achievements of these women. They ignored the people who doubted them, broke through the restrictions society placed on them, and paved the way for famous pilots like Amelia Earhart. Queen Bee, Bessie Coleman. Bessie Coleman left Texas in her 20s. She moved to Chicago. It was her brother's stories from World War I that made her interested in flying. They would tease Bessie that French women were superior. They said that they were better than African American women because they could fly planes. Those taunts became Bessie's inspiration. Unfortunately, flight schools in the U.S. did not allow her to enroll because of her race and gender. By 1918, very few American women were pilots. Those who did were usually white and rich. Bessie Coleman was determined to prove herself. She learned French and moved to Paris. In 1921, Coleman became the first African American and female pilot in France. When Bessie returned to the U.S., she still faced discrimination. She worked as a stunt pilot, which involved her doing very dangerous tricks. She dazzled crowds as she parachuted from planes. The daredevil was given the nickname Queen Bessie. 1. Aviator, a pilot, someone who flies planes. 2. Detour, a challenge or obstacle in your way. She died in 1926 during a flight with another pilot. About 10 minutes into the flight, Bessie's engine stopped working and she fell from the plane. Sadly, she never fulfilled her dream to open a flight school for black pilots. Still, Coleman's imprint on aviation history lives on. Aviator story still unfolding. More than 100 years after Harriet Quimby broke down barriers as the first woman to earn a pilot certificate, there are still very few women who choose flying as a career. Here are some of them whose stories researcher and author Lori Notaro dug up for her book, Crossing the Horizon. The first female pilot, Harriet Quimby. Harriet Quimby was already a well-known journalist when she became interested in airplanes. In 1910, she decided she would learn to fly. She took lessons at the Moisant School of Aviation. On August 1st, she became the first licensed pilot in the United States. On April 16, 1912, Quimby became the first woman to fly an airplane across the English Channel, the body of water between England and France. She guided her airplane through thick fog. She was widely celebrated for her accomplishment. In the summer, she flew to Boston to take part in the Harvard-Boston Aviation Meet. On July 1, 1912, while piloting her plane over Dorchester Bay, Quimby lost control. She and a passenger both fell from the aircraft and were tragically killed. The Queen of Diamonds and Air, Mabel Bowl. Mabel Bowl got her nickname, the Queen of Diamonds, because she wore sparkly jewelry, but the American socialite loved flying even more. She wanted to be remembered as the Queen of the Air. When living in Paris, she tried to find a pilot to fly with her across the Atlantic in January 1828. Mabel Bowl was also Amelia Earhart's fiercest competition. She and Earhart were stationed 90 miles apart on Newfoundland, Notaro told CNN. Bowl didn't succeed. Earhart made the crossing 6 months later in June. Miss America of Aviation, Ruth Elder. Ruth Elder was known for her acting, but her real dream was to become the female version of pilot Charles Lindbergh. Aviation, flying planes. Newspapers at the time loved to describe her as the American girl who refused to give up her dream of flying from New York to Paris. She even put flying above her marriage. Her husband complained that she devoted all her attention to aviation and none to him, reported The Scotsman, a newspaper in 1930. But mechanical problems caused her plane and dream to crash in her last attempt on October 11, 1927. She survived floating in the Atlantic Ocean. She was 360 miles from land before she was rescued. At the time, it was the longest flight ever made by a woman. Why remember these women? Everyone knows about Charles Lindbergh, the famous male pilot, but that's not the case for these women, Notaro said. History turned its back on them. I wanted to right that wrong. We have to remember the other pioneering aviators who paved the way for all the female pilots that came after them, she added. For Notaro, focusing on these women can inspire young girls. It helps young women see that they can actually follow their aviation dreams because they see the face of a woman trailblazer, Notaro said. Number 1. Which sentence best states the main idea of this text? A. Women are underrepresented as pilots. B. Several important female pilots are remembered because of their influence on female pilots of today. C. Bessie Coleman was the first African American female pilot. D. More women should become pilots. Number 2. Select the 2 details that should be included in a summary of the article. Choose 2 options. A. Female pilots had ambitious goals. B. Female pilots usually had other jobs. C. Female pilots are not remembered like male pilots are. D. Female pilots put flying above their families. E. Female pilots took unnecessary risks. F. Female pilots had light-hearted nicknames. Number 3. Read the sentence. They ignored the people who doubted them, broke through the restrictions society placed on them, and paved the way for famous pilots like Amelia Earhart. What does the phrase paved the way suggest about these female pilots? A. The female pilots constructed airports and built runways. B. The female pilots did not care about the people who doubted them. C. The female pilots were willing to put their own lives on the line. D. The female pilots made it easier for other women to become pilots. Number 4. Which 2 details best supports the conclusion that flying was very dangerous? Choose 2 options. A. Bold didn't succeed. Earhart made the crossing 6 months later in June. B. Unfortunately, flight schools in the U.S. did not allow her to enroll because of her race and gender. C. But mechanical problems caused her plane and dream to crash in her last attempt on October 11, 1927. D. She dazzled crowds as she parachuted from planes. E. About 10 minutes into the flight, Bessie's engine stopped working and she fell from her plane.